A pregnant bear keeps scratching the vet's door. When they open it, everyone starts crying. The wind howled like a wounded animal outside the Silver Pines veterinary clinic, carrying snow that piled in drifts against the weathered wooden walls. Inside, Margaret Maggie Lawson sat in her favorite armchair by the wood stove, her silver hair pulled back in a loose bun, wrinkles deepening around her eyes as she smiled at the warmth. At 65, her hands bore the marks of a lifetime spent tending to creatures both wild and tame, calluses, small scars, and a gentleness that animals seemed to sense immediately. Beside her lay Buddy, her golden retriever of 12 years, his muzzle now white with age, eyes cloudy but still watchful. He snored softly, paws occasionally twitching as he chased dream rabbits through imaginary meadows. The clinic was quiet tonight. No emergency calls had come in despite the blizzard. In small towns like Aspen Hollow, Colorado, everyone knew to prepare when the weather forecast warned of heavy snow. Maggie's eyes grew heavy as she thumbed through a worn veterinary journal. The article on wildlife rehabilitation, her specialty, blurred as exhaustion crept over her. She'd been up since dawn treating Mr. Peterson's prize mare, then vaccinating a litter of puppies, and finally splinting the broken wing of a red-tailed hawk that a local farmer had found struggling in his field. Just as she began to doze, Buddy's head snapped up, his ears perked forward, and a low, rumbling growl vibrated through his chest. "What is it, old boy?" Maggie whispered, instantly alert. Buddy was too well trained to bark without cause. The golden retriever rose stiffly to his feet, his tail neither wagging nor tucked, simply alert as he faced the clinic's back door. The growl deepened, then suddenly stopped. Buddy's head tilted in apparent confusion. Maggie followed his gaze to the frost-covered glass panel in the door. Through the crystalline patterns, a pair of dark brown eyes stared back at her, eyes she recognized immediately. "Willow," she breathed, setting aside her journal and standing quickly despite her aching joints. 3 years earlier, Maggie had found the young black bear caught in an illegal trap deep in the forest. The cruel metal teeth had nearly severed her front paw, and she'd been pregnant with her first litter. Despite Maggie's best efforts after freeing her, the trauma and blood loss had caused Willow to lose all her cubs. For weeks, Maggie had treated the bear in a secluded section of her property before releasing her back into the wild, naming her Willow for the tree under which she'd been found. And now, Willow had returned, staring through the glass with eyes that seemed to hold both exhaustion and hope. Her belly was swollen with new life. "Easy, Buddy," Maggie murmured, placing a restraining hand on her dog's head as she approached the door. She knew the risks. Wild animals, especially bears, were unpredictable. But something in Willow's gaze spoke of desperation and trust. As Maggie unlatched the door, the wind nearly tore it from her grasp. Snow swirled into the warm clinic, and with it came Willow, moving with painful slowness, her massive body barely fitting through the doorframe. Her fur was matted with ice and snow, and she panted heavily, eyes never leaving Maggie's face. Buddy, defying all natural instinct, stopped growling. The old dog approached cautiously, nose working overtime as he sniffed the air. Willow lowered her head, exposing her neck in a gesture of vulnerability that struck Maggie as profoundly unnatural for a wild predator. Then, to Maggie's astonishment, Buddy stretched his muzzle forward and gently touched noses with the bear, a greeting between old acquaintances. "You remember each other?" Maggie whispered, tears pricking her eyes. During Willow's recovery years ago, Buddy had often sat outside her enclosure, seemingly standing guard. Willow huffed softly, then suddenly groaned, her massive body shuddering. She sank to her knees on the clinic floor. "Oh Lord, you're in labor," Maggie realized. "And you came here. You came back to me." The next hours passed in a blur of focused activity. Maggie cleared the isolation room, laying down fresh straw and blankets. With gentle coaxing and Buddy's surprising assistance, the dog seemed to be encouraging the bear with soft whines. She managed to guide Willow into the makeshift den. The wood stove cast a warm yellow glow as Maggie gathered her emergency supplies, clean towels, antiseptic, surgical gloves. She'd delivered countless animals in her long career, but never a wild bear who had sought her out specifically for help. "I'm here, girl," she soothed as Willow panted and groaned. "I won't leave you this time either." Buddy settled himself just outside Willow's reach, his aging body alert despite the late hour. Occasionally, when Willow's pain seemed most intense, he would inch forward and gently lick her massive paw, as if offering comfort. The gesture brought fresh tears to Maggie's eyes. Near midnight, the first cub arrived, tiny, wet, and perfect. Maggie cleared its airways with practiced movements, her heart swelling as the little creature took its first breath and let out a squeaking cry. Willow responded immediately, gathering the cub to her with careful movements of her massive paws. The second cub followed shortly after, slightly smaller but equally vigorous. Maggie checked both carefully from a respectful distance, relieved to find them healthy and strong. Willow licked them thoroughly, her massive tongue nearly covering the tiny cubs entirely as she cleaned and stimulated them. By dawn, exhaustion had claimed both mother bear and human midwife. Maggie sat on a stool in the corner of the room, unwilling to leave but respecting Willow's need for space with her newborns. Buddy had somehow worked his way closer until he lay just beside Willow, their bodies not quite touching but close enough to share warmth. The sound of a truck engine outside roused Maggie from her half-sleep. Glancing at her watch, she remembered. David was coming by with supplies, and Emily was returning from her wildlife conference. "Stay with them," she murmured to Buddy, who acknowledged her with a flick of his ear. She slipped out, closing the isolation room door softly behind her. David Blackwell stomped snow from his boots as he entered, his tall frame filling the doorway. At 50, his dark hair was threaded with silver, face weathered from years in the mountains as a forest ranger. Behind him came Emily Carter, her cheeks flushed with cold, auburn hair escaping from beneath a knitted cap. "Morning, Mags," David called, his deep voice carrying a warmth reserved for few people. He'd been her student once, decades ago, before finding his calling in forest management rather than veterinary medicine. "Brought those antibiotics you wanted for the hawk." "And I brought coffee and muffins," Emily added, holding up a paper bag that steamed in the cold air. At 28, she worked for the state wildlife agency but volunteered at Silver Pines whenever she could. She'd been orphaned young and found in Maggie both a mentor and the grandmother she'd never had. "You both might want to set those down," Maggie said quietly. "I have something to show you that's going to take your breath away." She led them to the isolation room, pressing a finger to her lips before slowly opening the door. David's sharp intake of breath was audible even over the howling wind outside. Emily gasped, one hand flying to cover her mouth. There, in the nest of blankets and straw, lay Willow with her two cubs nestled against her dark fur, and curled beside them as if he belonged, there was Buddy, his golden coat a stark contrast to the bear's darkness. "Is that Willow?" David began. Maggie confirmed. "She came back last night in labor." "And Buddy is just lying there with them?" Emily whispered, awe evident in her voice. "Like their family," Maggie said, her voice catching. "He helped me through the whole birth, never showed a moment of fear." As if hearing his name, Buddy raised his head, regarding them with calm eyes before returning his attention to the cubs, who were nursing contentedly. "This is unprecedented," David murmured, his ranger's instincts warring with the undeniable evidence before him. "A wild bear seeking human help to give birth." "She remembers," Maggie said simply. "She knows this place meant safety once before." Emily stepped forward cautiously, her training taking over as she assessed the cubs from a distance. "They look healthy, good size, but Maggie, you know, we can't keep them." "I know," Maggie finished for her, "but the storm's supposed to last another week. We can't send them back out in this." David ran a hand through his hair. "Considering, I'll call headquarters, let them know the situation. As long as we minimize human contact and don't interfere with natural behaviors, we might be able to justify temporary shelter on humanitarian grounds." "Look at them," Emily said softly. "It's like they're all protecting each other." And indeed, there was something remarkable in the tableau before them. Willow curled protectively around her cubs, and Buddy curled protectively beside Willow, all of them forming a circle of unexpected trust. Outside, the snow continued to fall, cutting off the small town of Aspen Hollow from the wider world. Inside Silver Pines, an extraordinary family began to form. The storm didn't relent for 8 days. During that time, life at Silver Pines fell into an unusual rhythm. Maggie cancelled all non-emergency appointments, citing weather conditions. The few locals who did brave the snow for medicine or advice were kept to the front rooms, unaware of the miraculous scene unfolding in the isolation ward. Willow proved to be an attentive mother, nursing her cubs regularly and cleaning them with constant attention. She allowed Maggie to approach after that first day, though David was met with warning huffs if he came too close. Emily, interestingly, was accepted almost immediately, perhaps, Maggie mused, because the bear sensed the connection between them. Most remarkable was Buddy's transformation. The elderly dog, who had shown signs of slowing down considerably in recent months, seemed rejuvenated by his self-appointed role as protector. He would bring his toys, well-worn tennis balls and rope tugs, and place them near the cubs as if offering gifts. When Willow allowed her babies to explore the confines of their room, Buddy would watch attentively, occasionally using his nose to gently nudge a wandering cub back toward its mother. On the 4th day, Emily captured a moment that brought them all to tears. The smaller cub had wandered too close to the door, and before Willow could react, Buddy had carefully picked it up by the scruff, just as he might have carried a puppy, and returned it to the nest. Willow had watched the entire interaction without aggression, seemingly trusting the old dog completely with her precious offspring. "It's like he's teaching her," Emily whispered to Maggie as they observed through the door's window, showing her how to be a mother. "Or maybe they're teaching each other," Maggie replied, wiping away a tear, "how to trust despite every natural instinct telling them not to." By the 6th day, the isolation room could no longer contain the growing family's energy. With great caution, Maggie opened the clinic's back door, allowing access to the fenced yard behind Silver Pines. Though still blanketed in snow, it offered more space for the cubs to explore under their mother's watchful eye. What happened next became what David would later call the most extraordinary wildlife interaction I've ever witnessed. Buddy, moving with purpose despite his arthritic joints, began demonstrating to the cubs how to navigate the snow. He would plow forward with his broad chest, creating paths, then turn to watch as the curious cubs followed. He showed them how to dig through the powder to reach the earth beneath, how to sniff for hidden treasures, how to roll and play without straying too far. Willow observed these lessons from a short distance, occasionally joining in to demonstrate her own skills, standing on hind legs to reach high branches, using powerful paws to break through ice, finding sheltered spaces beneath low-hanging pines. Between bear and dog, the cubs received a master class in winter survival. They're teaching the same skills for different reasons, David noted as they watched from the clinic window. Buddy digs to bury bones and find mice. Willow digs to find roots and grubs. But to the cubs, it's all just learning how to survive. On the 7th night, as the storm finally began to weaken, Maggie sat in her rocking chair pulled close to the stove. Emily had fallen asleep on the clinic's small sofa, and David dozed in the armchair opposite, research papers about bear behavior scattered across his lap. Through the door, Maggie could see Willow and her cubs sleeping peacefully in their nest of blankets with Buddy standing guard nearby. "We've witnessed a miracle here," she whispered to herself, remembering the desperate, wounded bear she'd found in that trap 3 years ago. Something that defies everything we think we know about nature. She thought about her life, 6 decades devoted to healing animals, with no husband or children of her own to show for it. Some in town called her eccentric, the old woman who preferred the company of creatures to people. In moments of doubt, she sometimes wondered if she'd made the right choices. But watching Buddy, her faithful companion, forge this impossible bond with a wild bear and her cubs, Maggie felt a profound sense of validation. This was why she had been placed on this earth, not just to heal injuries, but to build bridges between worlds that rarely connected without fear or violence. Outside, the wind died down to a gentle whisper, and the heavy clouds began to part, revealing a sky brilliant with stars. The storm was ending. Spring came early to Aspen Hollow that year. By mid-March, the massive snow drifts had shrunk to patchy islands of white in a sea of emerging green. The creek behind Silver Pines, usually frozen until April, ran swift and clear, fed by melting mountain snow. For Willow and her cubs, now rambunctious balls of fur that Maggie had named Cedar and Juniper, the warming days meant increasing freedom. The small family still called the isolation room home but spent most daylight hours in the fenced yard, which extended into a wooded area at the property's edge. Maggie had reopened the clinic to regular patients, but word had spread throughout the small town about her unusual guests. Children pressed their faces against the waiting room windows, hoping for a glimpse of the bear family. Local authorities, initially concerned, had been won over by David's careful documentation of the situation and his assurance that proper reintroduction protocols would be followed when the time came. "The cubs are developing normally," Emily reported after her weekly measurements and observations. She kept her distance, using binoculars and a long-lens camera to record their progress without human interference. "Their wild instincts are intact. Willow's teaching them everything they need to know." "With some help," Maggie added, smiling as she watched Buddy demonstrate how to cross the creek using partially submerged stones as stepping places. The cubs followed clumsily, splashing and tumbling in the shallow water while Willow watched from the bank. "I've never seen anything like it," Emily admitted. "It's like they've formed their own interspecies pack. Buddy acts almost like an uncle or a father figure." "He never had puppies of his own," Maggie said softly. "I always felt guilty about that, having him neutered young. Maybe this is his chance to leave some kind of legacy." As March turned to April, Maggie began preparing for the inevitable. The cubs were growing rapidly, and Willow was showing increasing restlessness, often standing at the fence line and sniffing the air from the direction of the deeper forest beyond. She knew what needed to happen, though the thought brought an ache to her chest. "We should start the reintroduction process next week," David said one evening as they shared a simple dinner in the clinic kitchen. "The weather's stable, food sources are becoming plentiful, and the cubs are old enough to travel safely." "I know," Maggie nodded, pushing her stew around her bowl without eating. "It's just hard to say goodbye." Emily finished for her, reaching across to squeeze Maggie's weathered hand. "But this was always temporary. They belong in the wild." "Buddy won't understand," Maggie whispered. The old dog had formed such a profound bond with the bears that he spent more time with them than with her these days. "He'll look for them." David and Emily exchanged glances but said nothing. They all knew the truth. Nature followed its own course, regardless of human attachments or sentiments. The decision was taken out of their hands the very next night. It began with a distant rumble that Maggie initially mistook for thunder. She'd been preparing the evening medications for her regular patients when Buddy suddenly leaped up from his bed by the stove, barking with an urgency she hadn't heard in years. "What is it, boy?" she asked, moving to the window. The western sky glowed an ominous orange behind the mountains. Not sunset, something else. The clinic phone rang, startling her. "Maggie, it's Sheriff Collins. We've got a situation developing. Lightning strikes started a fire in the national forest. Winds pushing it toward town. I'm calling everyone on the east side to prepare for possible evacuation." Her heart dropped. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough. The early spring means lots of dry underbrush. Fire crews on it. But with the wind." He didn't need to finish. "I understand. I'll get ready." Maggie hung up and immediately went to check on Willow and her cubs. The bears were already agitated. Willow paced the isolation room, huffing and swatting at the door while the cubs huddled together in the corner, making distressed noises. Buddy stood between them and the door, his posture protective but confused. "You sense it, don't you?" Maggie said softly. "The fire." Even as she spoke, she could smell it, the acrid scent of burning pine carried on the strengthening wind. Making a swift decision, she moved to the back of the clinic where a gate led from the fenced yard into the forest beyond. The gate had remained locked throughout Willow's stay, part of their protocol to prevent accidental escape before the bears were ready. Now, Maggie fumbled with the key, her hands shaking with age and urgency. The metal resisted, rusted from disuse and winter moisture. "Come on," she muttered, jiggling the key harder. Behind her, she heard the isolation room door open. Willow appeared in the yard, cubs close behind her, Buddy at her flank. The bear's nose worked overtime, testing the smoke-tinged air. In the distance, a siren wailed, the town's evacuation alert. The fire was coming faster than expected. The key finally turned, but the gate remained stuck, warped wood and metal fused by years of weather. Maggie pushed with her shoulder, feeling pain shoot through her aging joints. "I can't," she began, then felt Willow's presence beside her. The massive bear rose to her hind legs, towering over Maggie, and brought her weight down against the gate. Wood splintered, metal groaned, and the barrier gave way. Beyond lay the forest, darker and deeper than the domesticated woods of Maggie's property. Willow hesitated, looking back at Maggie with those intelligent brown eyes. For a moment, time seemed suspended between them, 3 years of connection crystallized in a single glance. "Go," Maggie whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Take them somewhere safe." Buddy barked once, then darted through the opening. To Maggie's astonishment, Willow followed, her cubs scrambling behind her. The old dog took the lead, nose to the ground, heading away from the approaching fire and deeper into the forest. Just before they disappeared into the underbrush, Willow paused and turned back. Their eyes met one final time, the wild animal and the woman who had saved her life. In that gaze, Maggie saw something that transcended species, gratitude, trust, and perhaps even love. Then they were gone, swallowed by the darkness of the forest. The fire never reached Silver Pines. A last-minute wind shift and the heroic efforts of local firefighters contained the blaze to the western ridges. By morning, all that remained was a smoky haze hanging over the valley and a collective sigh of relief from the townspeople. Maggie returned home exhausted, her clothes smelling of smoke from the evacuation center where she'd spent the night tending to frightened pets and their equally frightened owners. The clinic seemed eerily quiet without the bears. The isolation room, cleared of blankets and straw by Emily while Maggie was away, looked sterile and empty. Most concerning was Buddy's continued absence. The old dog hadn't returned. And as hours stretched into days, Maggie's worry deepened. "He'll come back," David assured her, though she could hear the doubt in his voice. "He knows where home is. What if he's trying to stay with them?" Maggie asked, her voice breaking. "He's too old to survive in the wild, David. He needs his medication, his special food." "But he's smarter than we give him credit for," Emily said, putting an arm around Maggie's shoulders. "And he loves you? That will bring him home." A week passed with no sign of the golden retriever. Maggie left the back gate open and placed his bed outside with his favorite treats, hoping to lure him home. Each morning, she checked with rising disappointment, finding the bed untouched, the treats taken by raccoons or birds. Spring advanced steadily, transforming the landscape. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows around Aspen Hollow, and the forests echoed with the songs of returning birds. Life continued at Silver Pines. Animals were treated, advice given, the routine of a country veterinary practice unfolding as it had for decades. But for Maggie, joy had dimmed. She went through her days mechanically, caring for her patients with her usual competence but without the spark that had always defined her work. The loss of Buddy, her companion of 12 years, created a void that nothing could fill. David stopped by more frequently, often bringing dinner or simply sitting with her in companionable silence. Emily took on extra shifts at the clinic, her young energy helping to compensate for Maggie's flagging spirits. Neither mentioned Buddy or the bears, sensing that the wounds were still too raw. 1 month after the fire, David arrived at the clinic carrying a small box. His expression was carefully neutral as he placed it on Maggie's desk. "What's this?" she asked, setting aside the inventory sheets she'd been reviewing. "Got the memory cards back from the trail cameras we set up after the evacuation," he explained. "Thought you might want to see what they caught." With trembling hands, Maggie opened the box. Inside was a single printed photograph. For a moment, she couldn't make sense of what she was seeing. Then her vision blurred with tears. The image showed a small clearing beside a woodland stream. Willow stood in the shallow water, her cubs, noticeably larger now, splashing playfully around her, and at the edge of the water, sitting upright with an alertness that belied his age, was Buddy. His golden coat was dirty and matted with burrs, but his posture was strong, watchful, like a sentinel guarding his unusual charges. "He's alive," Maggie whispered, touching the image with a fingertip. "And he's still with them." "There's more," David said quietly. The cameras caught him leaving them regularly, heading east toward town, then returning days later. Emily and I think, we think he's been visiting them, not living with them full time. But then where? Maggie began, then stopped as a familiar scratching sound came from the clinic's back door. She rose so quickly her chair toppled backward, rushing through the examination room to the rear entrance. There, tail wagging weakly, sat Buddy. His coat was filthy, his body thinner than it should have been, and he smelled strongly of earth and pine sap. But his eyes were bright, and the whine that escaped him as he saw Maggie was one of pure joy. "Oh, you ridiculous, wonderful old fool," she cried, dropping to her knees and enfolding him in her arms. He licked her face enthusiastically, his entire body wiggling with happiness. David appeared in the doorway, grinning. "Looks like someone decided it was time to come home for a proper meal and a bath." Buddy received both along with a thorough checkup that revealed nothing more serious than exhaustion and minor dehydration. As Maggie toweled him dry that evening, she noticed something caught in his collar, a small tuft of black fur. "You've been visiting them, haven't you?" she asked softly, checking on them, then coming home to me. Buddy thumped his tail against the floor, eyes fixed on hers with an intelligence that sometimes made her wonder just how much he truly understood. Through the spring and into summer, a pattern emerged. Buddy would disappear every few days, always at dawn, returning by nightfall or occasionally the following morning. He never stayed away longer than that, as if he understood Maggie's worry. Each time he returned, he carried signs of his forest adventures, mud, burrs, occasionally small scratches that Maggie treated with gentle hands. David's trail cameras continued to document these visits. The images told a remarkable story, Buddy playing with the growing cubs, resting beside Willow, even appearing to patrol the boundaries of what they now understood to be the bears' established territory. The cubs, growing rapidly but still recognizable, seemed to greet the old dog with genuine enthusiasm in each new photograph. "He's living in two worlds," Emily observed one evening as they reviewed the latest images. "Domestic and wild, dog and wolf, he's found a way to be both." "Like a bridge," Maggie agreed, the realization bringing a sense of peace she hadn't felt since the night of the fire. "A bridge between my world and theirs." Late summer brought another surprise. Maggie was in the garden behind the clinic, harvesting tomatoes for her dinner, when she sensed, rather than heard, a presence at the forest edge. Looking up, she found herself staring into familiar brown eyes. Willow stood just inside the treeline, massive and magnificent in her wild state. Her cubs, no longer truly cubs but adolescent bears, peeked cautiously around her flanks. Buddy sat beside them, his expression almost smug, as if he'd brought them here deliberately. Maggie remained perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. This wasn't the desperate bear who had sought her help in winter's darkest hour, but a confident wild animal, strong and free. Yet, she had chosen to come here, to show herself to the human who had once saved her life. For long minutes, they regarded each other across the divide between domestic and wild. No words were needed. The connection between them transcended language. Then, with a soft huff, Willow turned and melted back into the forest, her children following. Buddy remained a moment longer, looking between Maggie and the retreating bears as if making sure both parties were safe, before trotting back to Maggie's side. That evening, in the comfortable quiet of Silver Pines, Emily brewed tea while David reviewed his ranger reports at the kitchen table. Maggie sat in her rocking chair, Buddy curled at her feet, his head resting on her slippers. Outside the window, the vast Colorado forest stretched toward the horizon, painted gold by the setting sun. "We did it, old friend," Maggie whispered, bending to stroke Buddy's soft ears. We were brave enough to trust. And we never lost each other. Buddy sighed contentedly, pressing closer to her feet. In his dreams, perhaps he ran with bears through mountain streams. But in his heart, Maggie knew he had found the perfect balance. The love of his human and the call of something wild and ancient that lived within him still. In the small wooden clinic, as darkness fell over Aspen Hollow, Maggie looked out at the forest where Willow and her children roamed free and felt a profound sense of completion. Sometimes in the harsh wilderness of life, souls of different species find each other, trust each other, and protect each other with a bond both simple and sacred. And sometimes, if they're very lucky, they find a way to keep that bond alive across the boundaries that separate their worlds. Like a bridge built of nothing more substantial than love and trust, yet strong enough to withstand any storm. Buddy sighed again, drifting into peaceful sleep, a bridge between worlds, connecting an old woman to a wild forest that still held a place for compassion and trust. And in that connection, Maggie had found the truest purpose of her long life's work. "Good boy," she whispered as the first stars appeared above the mountains. "The very best boy."